bit of a trick that sometimes we use when things are not sanding well. This spot here is a little bit rougher than normal, and even though I can pole sand this out properly, there's sometimes that maybe you realize too late that you didn't finish it properly. So instead of sanding like that, you might grab the sander and just with that, take it down, if that's necessary. Make sure you sand over it until you don't feel any sort of hump there though, because that method can easily create a hump. So another way of doing this is supposing, say, we'll pretend this butt joint is not sanding out very well. You don't want to grab a bench, you want to get your work done. If you get that sander up high enough, you can actually tip it out like that. And then the bottom will take that same spot down, and once again, just sand over it with the flat of the sander. Okay. Good to go?
Yep.
Okay. Empty sander and my piece of sandpaper. First thing I'm going to show is that is a sponge back sandpaper. The most basic way for me to say the benefits of it is it just simply sands a little easier, and for the most part I can describe that by sometimes you have a slight imperfection. The sandpaper can now bend a little bit more cooperatively into those bends. But anyways, off of the roll, you just simply measure off approximately 1 inch wider or longer than the sander. Now, I've got, this is a super sander here, or is it a Marshalltown? But anyways, it's got these fast clips here. Fairly easy to get it on and off. Now, first thing we're gonna do is line this up perfectly to the edge of the metal on this side right here. You want it as close to perfect as possible. That's important, and we'll get to that shortly. Why? Clamp her down. I like to pull this really tight. I literally stretch it out before I fit it in. When it's on snug, you have a lot less chance of the sandpaper becoming damaged, and sometimes you can sand for a few minutes or maybe even a half an hour before you realize that you've got a damaged piece of paper, and now you have to resand everything. Anyways, flush down there. Now we got flush up here. Pull that in tight, best we can. There we go. So as we see over here, it's flapping a little bit. It's too wide. Technically, it is not too wide. You want this. If that stopped right at the edge of the metal here, every time, how about we walk over the angle? Every time you go up or down, it will cut a line, and then you're gonna have to fix that there. This is kind of a relaxed buffer for that. But anyways, if you've done a decent job here, sanding is going to be an easy part of your task and you won't mind doing it. So we're going to start off with this angle right here. Now, the first thing we're going to demonstrate is why we want it flush. And that's exactly why. Your sandpaper, if it's loaded properly, should go right to the edge, but no further. If it's on and not flush, sticking out, it's going to damage that side right there. If it's too far in, then you're going to leave a small, tiny little area of unsanded. You know, maybe it's only going to be a millimeter or two wide, but you don't want that either. So anyways, usually the angles are pretty good on the inside here already. You don't want to sand any more than you have to. Obviously, you don't want to overwork yourself. But number two, mud on the angles tends to be very thin, and you're quickly going to bring it right down to the tapes and burn the tapes, and you're probably going to have to recoat it then. So anyways, I went up and down already. That's pretty much it for inside the angle. Down at the bottom. Now, if you happen to have a chunk down the bottom, which I actually don't, it looks like it, you want to get rid of that. You want your trim carpenter to be able to go in there without getting angry with you for leaving crap all over the place. It happens all the time, but try not to do that. Now your sander is on a diagonal angle here. You don't want it straight up and down because there's still the risk of cutting, especially now this flush side will cut. When you get to this joint right here, you just want to make sure that you're sanding a little bit extra to make sure that everything lines up properly. Sometimes one tool will damage work that was done. For example, when we run a tool down here, it might leave an extra inch. Back up. Now that right up there is what we call a three-way. They are very difficult to sand without damaging them. Do not try to sand up and down all the way. You'll lose control of the sander and you're gonna end up smacking the ceiling or the wall. Wiggle it around 2-3 inches at a time. That's all I do. Going back, it's the same sort of thing. Over there. And again, that is just simply because you do not want to damage that three-way that we spent so much time working on. So further along on the ceiling, I usually just, 3 feet at a time, and that's it. So let's get close into the feathering here. Let's go on the angle right here. You'll see that as I run my finger along, there is now a perfectly smooth transition between paper and drywall mud, which is what we're looking for. I guess I should mention that they say foam back sandpaper, I call it sponge back, same thing. It's a 150 grit. Feel free to use a 180 if you're using a softer type of mud, such as a topping compound. I'll go over that someday on which mud is softer than others. But anyways, we pretty much exclusively use 150 for finish sanding simply because we've never had an issue, not once, with someone complaining that the scratches are showing. If something's painted properly, 150 should always be fine. So let's take care of the screws now. Again, if they've been coated properly and your second coat is wider than the first without edges, it should be fairly easy. 1, 2, 3. I could probably get away with 2, but fatigue tends to eventually cause the 2 to not work very well. So again, 1 on the left side, 1 more up the middle, and then keep an eye out for any debris that might be in there. Now we get to this ugly spot here. You don't want your sander to necessarily be going over these plugs like that. That was really gentle. You could end up catching a piece of paper and the paper rips off. So you get as close as possible without actually touching the cutout portion of the plug. Okay, I'm going to come back to that plug later with a sanding sponge, but we've now flattened it out the best we can. Let's go over to the flat. We should sand the screws, but that would get boring really quickly. I like to sand at least 6 inches, probably more like 8 inches this direction. If you go back and forth like this, you risk smacking that wall. You don't want that, that's a touch-up. Center, and then work your way up. I would say I have 4 or 5 passes depending on what the flat wants. So we're just going to continue on until we get to the butt joint. First thing we want to do with the butt joint is take a look at the bottom. If there's a lot of debris, grab that putty knife that you should always be keeping in your back pocket. If you don't have a back pocket, get a back pocket. Clean it up a little bit, run our sander along that. Remembering that every once in a while there's a nail sticking up from the floor or something like that, so you don't want to wreck it. I like doing 2 passes on the butt joints. They're a little bit more work. And quite a few more swipes. Sander again on an angle like this. And then I like to go back on it one more time, a little bit quicker. The second pass just allows me to get another look at it before we go. This is usually the roughest area right here. So even though we've sanded up, we're just going to pretend that we didn't do any sanding here and continue on with this flat. Wander over to the stick bead over here. Just like the butt joint. You don't want anything down there. Now generally I scrape very few bottoms just simply because it's not necessary. But if you see something down there that's going to be too hard to sand off, get rid of it. Down below, and your pedal. Once again, sand your diagonal. Don't do the whole thing up and down. You don't have the same amount of leverage. Do about 3-4 feet at a time. Like the butt joint, you want to give the bead a fair bit of sand. You're watching to take it down to the bead. Once you get down to the bead, don't go any further. Oh, let's go over to this lift off. If you can get a good look at this one. Is that showing up in the camera?
Yes, it is.
This is the one drawback of the sponge paper. It tends to not remove those very well. I will sometimes have a second sander with regular sandpaper on it just for the purpose of taking that down. Another thing that you can do is just lightly take that down a little bit. It helps. You can feel that it went away, so no worries. So we're going to go back up, but not all the way to the ceiling. We don't want to hit the ceiling. Spot there. Well, I think I got rid of it. Every once in a while you do have to touch them up, but I recommend that you don't touch up if you don't have to, because that means you have to stand around, wait for it to dry, and come back the next day. So anyway, we go back up to the angle. And that's done. Now, I'm not going to bother showing to sand the other side, but what I like to do from here is I grab my sander just take the point down. That's called cutting the bead, although nobody really ever says that anymore. Most people do not clean out the plugs, okay? And we get away with it, but it's kind of rude to the electricians. But you can just take your putty knife and dig that out. Now, of course the electrician could do that, it only takes a few seconds, but sometimes the electricians are in wiring these up after the carpet or the flooring is already down. Well, they don't want that crap hitting the floor all the time. So this is a polite thing to do, and the electricians do appreciate it. And again, try not to touch the paper, but probably even from back there, we can see how rough that is around there. Now, I've been sanding for many years. I don't recommend you getting close unless you feel really confident. Always take the sanding sponge and just in circular motions lightly go around until you've got it down. That's exactly what's going to happen to this one here as well. We're going to take our sponge and make sure we get in the whole way. One last thing, the light check. We used to use extension cords, light bulbs. Light bulbs would burn out like crazy because the old incandescent light bulbs just can't be shaken unless you have a heavy duty one. So, first thing you do, now I'm going to be insanely thorough about this. I don't expect everybody to do this much light checking. You check sideways. Is there any flaw? If there's not, then you check on a downward stroke. Now, in the case of the angle, it's perfectly fine. I didn't need to do anything. When you're checking bead, like we showed you that little lift-off spot over there, that lift-off, if it's not quite right, will not show up with the light. But if you put the light underneath it, pour on top of it, and then you can see it. And well, if we look up here, that's a pot light. No, that's a pot light. That might be shining right down on your corner bead. So after you've left and they've painted it and they put the light in, then it's going to show somebody's going to be upset with you. So let's go to the flat. Now normally I just check side to side. If you really want to be thorough, that direction as well. That right there was about the equivalent of taking your thumbnail and popping it in. And screws really don't need to be checked. If you didn't get them, something horrible is going on. That's pretty much it for your sanding. I guess I should mention, as I should mention in every video, I should be wearing a mask, but I don't think you want to be listening to me talk while I'm wearing a mask. So hopefully this was helpful for you. And although I don't say it too often, a like or a subscribe if you think I've been useful. That'd be fantastic. It's going to help me continue making new videos. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one.